Hello, everyone. Welcome to my live. This is Mark Turi, and as always, I'm going to start off a bit slow today, or shall I say, start off with some sort of small talk for a few minutes, waiting for people to come in. I want to, first of all, again, thank everyone who have been watching my videos and those who have been watching my lives. I have been um, I have been reposting or reloading a few videos from the Nerdy Bunch, and I've got 9 of them in total. I think I've uploaded either 3 or 4, so I've got a few more to do, and then I'm going to focus on these lives, which I'll do about twice a week. And I'll do some things like some PowerPoints. I have actually quite a few PowerPoints in the next couple weeks that I'd like to share with y'all. And so that will really be nice. There'll be history stuff, and on Saturday, I am going to do a PowerPoint that's in 2 parts. The first part is going to be breaking down the different what are called schools of history, and I'll get into what that means on Saturday. Just different types of history, different schools of history. And then I'm thinking either next Wednesday or next Saturday, probably next Wednesday, I'm going to go through what's called historiography, and I'll compare the sort of Marxist school of historiography with what's called historicism, which was proposed by one of my favorite philosophers, who's Karl Popper. So the two Karls will go toe to toe in a all-out intellectual war on history, and I hope everyone enjoys that. As far as tech is concerned, not the tech, but tech is in my personal technology, I'm trying to upgrade and make the quality of my videos better. For whatever reason, I was really unsatisfied with my quality of my video last weekend. I think I might have hit a setting or something. I think maybe my internet was not doing very well or something. So the first thing I did was order a brand new webcam because I'm just using the webcam on my laptop and it doesn't run high def, and I'd like to make better videos. And then I'm also going to invest in a cable that runs from my router directly to my laptop because my Wi-Fi's fine, but as you'll notice, even watching this on the replay, it does get a little laggy. So please just bear with me on those two things because I know the tech stuff, but it's going to take a little bit. I got a new mic, so thankfully my audio is a lot better, very thankfully. So that was one thing. I'll get a new camera, so it'll, be better. And then I'm gonna get like a, what's it called, an Ethernet cable or whatever, just so I can boost the connectivity. And hopefully all of that will make things sharper, smoother, better. It's also the internet here that I'm using in my flat is not the best. So, it's one of those things where I'm just doing with what I have until I can, afford more and get more and so forth. And that's why I'm thinking of getting that cable, which I hope will work out and run. But audio sounds fine on the last couple lives. Again, thankfully, I've got my mic working. One or two lives it wasn't working. Now it's actually working, so that's good. And connectivity and audio should be better in the next couple streams. I'm also really happy now that I am able to I can do PowerPoint presentations, and I've got quite a few to do. Just want to say hi to a couple people here. We got Joe Giuseppe who's on. Joe, hello. Thank you for being here. Not a problem. Do what you need to do. Listen. It's going to be a heavy topic. We're going to talk about philosophy today, so hope you enjoy it. And Irish Mart, we missed you on Saturday. No problem, of course, if you had something else to do. But yeah, missed you then. I will be back this Saturday. Hope you can join us. I always appreciate you coming on. I hope you watched on the replay, and thank you again for all your support, Irish. It's amazing to have you here, and I'm very happy that you are here. So thanks both of you. And again, anyone watching on the replay, if you haven't, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment if you'd like on the video. As I mentioned again, I'm going to be doing some technical upgrades here in the next little while. So just bear with me as far as quality is concerned. I think I've got my audio okay, but internet, Wi-Fi, streaming, and I'm getting a webcam soon, a new webcam. So I won't have to just do it off of my laptop. So I'm hoping I can get all this stuff by Saturday. I should be able to, but again, I'm not sure when the webcam is coming. Should be coming hopefully by by the weekend, if not next week. And then I think tomorrow, the next day, probably tomorrow, because tomorrow's Thursday or Friday, I'm going to grab that cable so I can run my router straight through. I do want to say today, because I always talk about the weather, was 25 degrees Celsius. I guess that's got to be mid 70s, high 70s Fahrenheit for our American friends. Please let me know what that actually is if you do the conversion. I'm just winging it. But it was beautiful today. It had a nice breeze where I live. Just the heat wave's over, but it is supposed to rain next week. It doesn't rain, not going to rain a lot, but it is supposed to rain, and it's supposed to be, I would say, high 60s, low 70s. So anywhere from, I don't know, 18 to maybe 22, 23 degrees Celsius. Again, 60s, let's say 60, 70, somewhere in there in Fahrenheit. So maybe 65 to 75 Fahrenheit. So not horrible, but it is the fall, of course, or the autumn, depending on where you come from. Usually in Canada, we say the fall, but I know some places say the autumn. And other than that, I my semester has officially started, but of course I'm not taking regular classes. So I was able to meet with a professor and started some research, getting collecting some research um, to do my thesis, which is due in 7 months. And I'm looking forward to getting all that out of the way. The other thing I forgot to say right ahead of at the top is, of course, today is September 11th. So just briefly, I just want to touch on the 23rd anniversary of September 11th. I know that a lot of people here probably are old enough to remember. If for any reason I have a fan that's younger than 23, which I might, anyone watching this on the replay, that was quite an event. I mean, it's really hard to describe if you weren't alive for it. Um, but just to give you my brief story, because again, I want to, when I want to, it's a was a horrible, horrible attack. 3,000 people were murdered. 23 years ago today, and the world itself really changed. I remember always thinking between like 1991 when the Soviet Union fell until 9/11 was really a very happy-go-lucky time. The Soviet Union had been defeated, and until 9/11, if you look at music and movies and stuff through the 90s and early 2000s, everything was just happy. There was the tech boom, the internet, like there was a lot going on. And it was really interesting being, growing up during that time. 11 years old, I guess I was or excuse me, I was 8 years old in 1991, and then I was 18 years old in 9/11. happened, and those years are very formative. And I guess I could say I'm very lucky in that sense that I got to have those happy-go-lucky years. Even though I will say that growing up, I didn't have the best childhood. Unfortunately, my parents tried, but personally, there were other issues, but at least as far as macro issues, economy, politics, music, art, and stuff, there was quite a golden age. And it's really a shame that, people of a certain age who were born within a few years before and or after 9/11 never got to see that kind of happy-go-lucky golden age because the world was music, the world, like everything was just happy. I don't know, what to say. It was a very interesting time anyway. Of course, I'm also aware that there was still wars. I'm well aware of Bosnia, Ireland, Sri Lanka, Congo. I'm not saying it was all 100% perfect. East Timor, there was a lot going on, but at least there was some in North America where I grew up, there was some loss of innocence and confidence after 9/11. So please understand that I grew up in Canada, so I'm talking specifically to my own experience. And again, that doesn't negate what was going on in Bosnia or Ireland or East Timor or the Congo and some horrific things. Rwanda was going on in the 90s as well. So please understand that I'm aware of that. But I am speaking from a specific point of view. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. I was 18. I was in college, and I remember it very well. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody knew if it was a global thing. So yeah, I just wanted to take some time out to remember that because that was probably, when I was growing up, my parents remembered when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And until 9/11, that was like the thing. Like they remember where they were when that happened. And I never had that growing up until 9/11 because my parents would have been, I guess, at that time. So that was 61 when he was assassinated. So my parents were like early teenagers. My dad, I guess, was probably 15, maybe my mom was 14, somewhere in there. Depending, of course, on the month, maybe they were, so for them, they had their moment when they were teenagers. And of course, when Dr. King was assassinated and a lot of stuff that went on after that, they still remember. But for them, it was John F. Kennedy. For me, it was 9/11. So yeah, 9/11. Here's what Irish says. Yeah, 9/11 was surreal. Was on a study leave day and couldn't believe the breaking news. Yeah, the thing was the attack started really early. I think 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was actually at my college because it was the second week of my college. We started the on the 4th, so on the 4th of September 2001. That was my first day of freshman year. So a week later was 9/11. And yeah, anyway, I just remember that. So I just want to take time off. Also, I do want to say too that many people that were stranded, of course, because flights were stranded and grounded, and a lot of people in Canada took in stranded people, and stranded Americans especially, and they stayed in people's homes for like several months until they could get back. So there's always been a great connection between Canadians and Americans that a lot of people don't really see because there's a rivalry sometimes between our two countries. But when it came time to 9/11, you know, people were opening up their doors in Canada to strangers who were Americans so they could, eventually get home. And I've seen a lot of documentaries on that. So just knowing that our countries are really close, especially in time of need, is always a good thing. So it's 14 after, almost 15 after. I really want to get into my presentation here today, but again, just noting what today is, what today means. And for those on the replay, if you would like to comment on where you were when you found out that 9/11 happened, go right ahead. If it's not comfortable for you, again, no worries, but I'm always interested in hearing that. Okay, let me get some water here, which I have a little lemon inside. I don't know about anyone else, but I find fresh lemons with some water to be extremely refreshing, especially cold water, fresh cold lemons. And if I'm sweating or anything, it just gets, just cools me off, especially on a hot day. So, what are we talking about today? Well, I did a poll on my community tab, and it got 4 votes. And of course, it was 50-50. And between this topic, which is the differences between biological determinism and social determinism. And as I mentioned earlier in the stream, on Saturday, we're going to go ahead and do a two-parter. So we're going to do the first part of 2 parts on the different schools of thought in history, which we will first talk about different types of history and schools of history on Saturday. And then I think next Wednesday or next Saturday, depending, we will continue with historiography, and we'll do a presentation on the Karl Marx theory versus the Karl Popper theory, which I call the two Poppers or the two Karls, and we'll talk about that. So today we're going to talk about the differences between biological and social determinism, and we're going to talk about some of their impact on science, on philosophy, and things like gender, and even on some of the kind of culture war issues that are going on today. And we're just going to get into points of view. I certainly will give you my opinion on it. It will just be my opinion because I'm not an expert in this, but I do understand sort of the philosophy and philosophical breakdown. So the first thing is, whenever we talk about something like this, we have to get into, well, what is determinism? What does that mean? And essentially, the word determinism is a philosophical word, which means that certain things in our lives, okay, in this case, the lives of individuals and the lives of humans, are determined in one sense. They're predetermined or they're inevitable. In the modern world, and I'm going to give you a third, as an example, a third type of determinism. And again, this is going to be simply as an example that's going to lead us into these other examples of social and biological determinism. But I'm not sure how many people out there, and I'm sure many people know this person, probably know a little bit of this person, but I'm always curious on if anyone grew up in the following churches. If they grew up as a Presbyterian, in the Reformed Church, to which there are 3 types of Reformed churches. One is in the Netherlands, one's in Switzerland, and one is in Hungary. And in fact, my paternal grandmother grew up as in the Hungarian Reformed Church. They all have one thing in common, which is they all follow the theology of a man, a French theologian called John Calvin, or Jean Calvin. And here where I live, we actually have a square that's named after John Calvin, because, of course, most Protestants in Hungary, where I live, are Calvinist. And I'm going to introduce to you this idea of theological determinism to segue into the other 2 types. If someone is a Calvinist, generally speaking, and again, this might differ, but generally speaking, John Calvin believed in what's called theological determinism. He believed that when someone was born, when an individual was born, it had been predetermined by God whether or not they were saved and whether or not they were even worthy of God's love. So it didn't really matter what an individual did in this life. They would never know whether or not they were saved until they died, went to heaven, and if they were saved, if it was predetermined, they would go to heaven. And even if they were Presbyterians or part of the Reformed Church or Christians, even if they maybe were part of another religion, you would just be saved beforehand. So it was already salvation was already predetermined. So you had no choice. So doing good works Although I will say that in modern churches, of course, they do good works. It's not just faith, they do a lot of study on theology and so forth. The Calvinist churches are very theologically and intellectually theologically based, and they do a lot of study on that stuff. But it just was meaning that no matter what you did, you were either saved or you weren't. So that's a very, very good example to segue onto biological and social determinism. So, meaning that are we predetermined to be who we are as individuals? Okay. How much does our own choices or free will enter into the conversation? How, when it comes to our tastes, our thoughts, our taste in music, our taste in art, the things that we like, the things we don't like, the things that we're afraid of, or the things that we love, how much of it has been already predetermined at the moment of our birth? Okay. And of course, there's these two schools of thought. So, other than theological determinism or predestination, as I mentioned from John Calvin, we'll start with biological determinism. And the reason I'm going to start with biological determinism is because a lot of people that I've known in the past are pretty convinced that biological determinism is what is true. Maybe there are things about it that are true 100%. Maybe there are. But you have to understand when we're talking about the word determinism, determinism is actually a philosophy within the subject of metaphysics. And that's a big question on whether or not science can prove metaphysical questions or whether or not it can only deal with what is natural rather than or physical rather than metaphysical. And I'm on the team, as my opinion, that says that while science can give us insight into certain things, it's not really. Some people use the term agnostic, but even that is a metaphysical term. It just doesn't really deal with metaphysical questions. It just deals with what we can see and observe in the physical world. And certainly, science does contradict certain religious or spiritual ideas like creationism, young earth creationism, possibly faith healing and this kind of stuff. So there is some overlap and I understand that. Of course, not every religious person is a creationist or believes in faith healing, but that's another discussion. So almost 20 years ago in 2007, um, a small group of four people, uh, mostly one scientist, one journalist, and two philosophers, that being Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, and Christopher Hitchens, at a round table, and they put forth this idea of the new atheism, which not every atheist is a new atheist. It's just that it was a new flavor of atheism. And if we read some of the corresponding books, like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion and some of his works after, and especially with Sam Harris and so forth, and Daniel Dennett, some of the books that they wrote almost 20 years ago, they certainly give a lot of their philosophical expressions to the idea of biological determinism. What does that mean? It simply means that when we are born, we are wired and or encoded by a certain genetic makeup, a biological construct. Whether it's our physical attributes, which we know are genetics, eye color, hair color, height, body type, we can inherit illnesses, for example. That in addition to that, things like your fears, what you're afraid of, what you love, the music that you listen to, the religion that you follow, whether or not you believe in a god or whatever, are predetermined by our genes, including psychological factors. So if there's something you don't like about yourself, if you're lazy, if you're always angry, and so forth, whether it's negative or positive, you could also be a very hard worker and be very successful. Well, that always boils down to your genes, to your genetics, and to your biology. And there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. And this can be a very pessimistic, defeatist attitude because obviously, if you're successful, if you're a billionaire, then you were just encoded even before you were born with just the right amount of genes. And unfortunately, if you're poor and you go through some tough times, you're born with mental illness, there's just nothing you can do. And so, this is also why a lot of people will believe in social justice because they'll say, of course, you're just lucky if you're born to be a billionaire. And if you're born to be impoverished, you're just unlucky. And so that's why we need society to step in or government to step in to boost up those people. So they're not, for example, misanthropes, but they are kind of defeatist. And I find this to be, on one hand, very disconcerting. It can often be interpreted as very negative, and a lot of people will say that those who profess biological determinism can be pretty stubborn and a little bit on close-minded. Okay, I want to say that biology, being what it is a plethora of different ideas, and even the study of genetics, right? For example, and I want to also tell you about a personal background. When I was an undergrad, I took a biology course, and I learned a lot about biology and genetics. What I did not learn in that course was biological determinism, because that is a philosophical idea. So I did learn that yes, it's possible for certain people to be predisposed for genes that can turn into ALS, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancers, a whole myriad of other horrific diseases. I learned that addiction can be passed down from generation to generation. So can psychological traumas. So can things like schizophrenia and depression. So obviously, human beings, based on good research and science, we can be predisposed for certain things. But when it comes to our personalities, our attitudes, and the things that we like, that's a bit of a stretch. Because what I also learned in my biology class was that science does not deal with metaphysical questions, which is also strange because scientific skeptics and a lot of new atheists, and again, I want to make I'm not claiming every single atheist in the world believes this, or that even every skeptic believes this, but there seems to be a party line, especially if you're online or in these groups, that these individuals kind of think, well, it's science. So science has proven this when they really haven't. They've proven that we are predetermined for some things. Of course, since Gregor Mendel, back way back when, started Mendel squares in genetics, right? We know that I have blue eyes. Well, it was probably passed down somehow. I'm tall. That was passed down, and so on and so on. So that's where it is. So yes, unfortunately, if someone in your family has schizophrenia, you can have schizophrenia. Someone was an alcoholic, you can have an alcoholic, you can be an alcoholic. But then the new atheists went even a step further to reduce all of these other conditions down to being predetermined. And I remember reading this stuff when I was getting out of Scientology, and it led to a lot of depression. I just want to go through and say here, hey, Joe, again, before I get into the next part. Hello, Joe. Hello, chat. Hello, Joe. So, yeah, predisposed doesn't mean predestined. Our genes interact with our circumstances and environment. Joe, you're one step ahead of me because, of course, I'm going to get into social determinism in a moment. And I am talking about extremes now. So, extreme social or biological determinism is probably not true. It's probably not scientific. It's philosophy. But of course, there are bits and pieces within that that can be true. We can be predisposed to certain things. Some people believe that what we're predisposed to becomes our destiny, so to speak, and that there's nothing we can do. So I'll take a billionaire like Elon Musk. If you're really a strong biological determinist, well, he was born that way. He was born to have these psychological characteristics of being successful. Therefore, he's successful. And if you're not born with it, well, you know, what does that mean? And also, yes, Irish smart. Thank you. So that's the extreme. Now, again, I want to make sure that I don't mix any words. I'm not accusing anybody of believing this. Again, there's a lot of people that are skeptical. Um, there's people that are religious who might believe in this. There are people who might be politically left wing or right wing who believe in this. It's not just the new atheists. I know they just popularized this idea. And Joe, Elon Musk has more money than I could ever dream of, but he's still not happy. Yeah, yeah, he's fighting the culture war. I agree. You know, um, yeah, I don't know what I would do with that amount of money, but I also don't think that he was determined to be that way. So again, think of biological determinism as an extreme. We inherit every single characteristic, physical or otherwise, about us, and we're destined to be that way, and we can't change it. Now, if we move on to social determinism, what does this mean? Well, social determinism has been around since the Greeks, the Stoics, and many other Greek philosophers in the ancient times believed that human beings were born as a blank slate, which is sometimes known, I believe it's a Latin term called tabula rasa or rasa, tabula rasa. Not only did many of the ancient Greek philosophers believe this, but in modern times, Rene Descartes believed this, John Locke believed this, and very famously, Karl Marx believed this. So, this is kind of the opposite of biological determinism. It says that our biology has little to nothing to do with who we are, that they're just things, right? They believe a social determinist, and again, I'm talking extremes here, regardless of someone's religion or political belief, says if you're born in a society with religion, whatever that society is, you're of that religion. If you grow up in a society, and this is a Karl Marx thing, that is quote unquote capitalist, then you basically have to unlearn how to be a capitalist and you have to be retaught how to be a Marxist or a socialist. So not only do genetics basically mean little to nothing, but everything that you are is based on society. So, for example, a biological determinist would argue that someone is predetermined to be liberal or conservative depending on genetics, how we as human beings respond to things like empathy and compassion. Those that have higher grades of empathy and compassion have been passed down genes from the previous people before us and are determined to be more liberal and left wing, whereas those that believe in a more harder or paternalistic genes inherit genes and become more conservative. A social determinist will say nonsense. Someone is a liberal if they're born into a liberal society. If their cultural, their religion is liberal, if the society that they're in is liberal, they will become liberals. On the other hand, if we're born again into a more paternalistic society and a family culture where, working hard and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and not receiving handouts is part for the course, then you are going to be a conservative. Of course, there's one thing you should notice by now is that there is no agency. There is no idea of individual choice or even personal experience in these extreme determinist factors. So, it's possible. I mean, I grew up in Canada. Technically, Canada is considered more of a liberal democracy. I grew up being told that we should love the monarchy. Turns out I don't like the monarchy. That's just a personal opinion. You can love the monarchy, that's great. I just happen not to. But if Karl Marx was right, I was born in a society that revered the monarchy, so I should love the monarchy. So why don't I? Well, then the biological determinists will say, well, I guess I inherited some anti-authoritarian genes, but from whom? I don't know where that would have come from. Is that genetics or is that my personal experience? And so again, we have both some true things because, for example, when it comes to our society, right? If we live in a society where we have an education system that allows us to read books freely, pick our own religion freely, and our own political ideas freely, then biology, I don't think, or society really play a factor necessarily. I mean, our society is influencing us probably more than our genes because you have to think of these poor people who are in authoritarian countries, right? Their society is not allowing them to read materials by George Orwell or, whatever political thought that's anti authoritarian. They're in an authoritarian culture. So, what opportunities do they have? And at that point, are they biologically constructed just to go along with authority? That's pretty defeatist, right? Like that's not that kind of sounds like, well, they were just determined to be that way, right? So we get a conundrum. And so are we, is it nature or is it nurture? Are we born with an inherited nature that can simply never be changed and we can do nothing about it? Or is it nurture and we're born as blank slates? And depending on where we live and what culture we're in, that determines who we are. One of the reasons why I bring this up is because, and I don't want to say who, but you can probably make a calculation on what it is. Someone did a stream a little while ago where they interviewed someone who decided that they were a gender realist. Okay. And there's this weird, like, secular right wing kind of culture, especially online, that sort of is denying trans people rights, or at least they're they believe that like gender and sexuality is sort of the same thing. And I don't want to go on a rant here. I don't want to shame people for having different opinions, but I'll just put it this way. There's a lot of expression and identities that are based on our culture. They may or may not be inherited. They just might be strictly cultural based. Like when we say something is a social construct, that's what we mean. It means that it is constructed by our society because guess what, right? In certain places in the world, like in Thailand, for example, transgendered men are actually revered and they're called Thai lady boys. I know that's not a really good term to say, but that's what they're called. And for many, many, many hundreds of years, these quote unquote Thai lady boys have been revered. They're not discriminated against, but yet they are in our society. So this is where things become non-universal. And so if we look at things like, excuse me, I got too excited there and knocked off my microphone. Too serious. Um, but if we look at things like masculinity, right? There's a lot of things that I agree and don't agree about that. I grew up watching movies, action movies from the 80s and 90s when, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Sylvester Stallone were the height and pinnacle of masculinity. Tough, macho, six packs, bodybuilders. But I also watch a lot of movies from India and from China and Hong Kong, Indonesia, and like their men are what we might call more effeminate, but they're still men. They're still males. And so there has to be something that differs with our culture. So there has to be something. There has to be something that we are predisposed to by our genetics because that is true. Eye color, hair color, certain conditions, diseases, of course. But then things like music, I always found it interesting. Like, why do I like the music that I like? So, just to disclose this, my favorite music is punk rock. I love punk rock from all the different eras. I haven't listened to anything really new in a little while, but let's say from the late 70s until like the early 2000s, right? I always wondered in my life, why did I choose that genre of music? When I was in high school, punk rock was not that popular. So, like, if I wanted to be popular, I would have picked pop music or hip hop or something else. Why did I choose punk? Well, was I predetermined for that? Was there something in my genes? I mean, punk rock started in like the late 70s. So, how would it be in my genes? My father listened to punk rock. He had, London Calling on LP, but then he also loved the Stones and the Beatles and Roy Orbison and Frank Sinatra. So, like, where does that come from? Do drum beats? Do I like drum beats because my people were drumming for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years? Or when I was coming up, when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, in high school, when my brain was starting to develop, did I just have friends that liked the music, played the music? Was it something about my own personal development? Was it the fact that I lived in Canada, and that in Canada in the 90s, punk rock was not major popular, but it was popular enough that we had punk rock television shows, where like there'd be an hour every Friday night or something, and they would just play punk rock music videos, and then Much Music, which is like MTV. Like, like I always wondered about this. I was never satisfied with, well, you probably like drumming and certain music. I was never satisfied with that. So I think it does have to do in the fact that I was living in a culture that had that music. Because I think had I grown up in Tibet, or had I grown up in India, or had I grown up in a place in sub-Saharan Africa, I probably wouldn't like punk rock. I wasn't predisposed to that. So these are the type of questions that I've always wondered. So this is where I kind of where my thought process comes to. And Chad, my friend, is here. Hello there, Chad. We're just talking about some stuff here. Hi, everyone. Hi, Irish. And of course, why do you like Chicago style pizza? That's a good. That's good. It's a good question. Was I destined? Pardon me. I'm predetermined by my biology to like pizza, or was it just because I went to Chicago when I was in my 30s, had a slice and was like, "Damn." Or actually, maybe it was Vegas, because actually in the Four Queens, there's a Chicago-style pizzeria and pub in the Four Queens restaurant. I think that's when I had deep dish for the first time. Anywho, let me see here. Italian subs, but actually Neapolitan is, I love. Yeah, I have a couple tattoos on my wrists. They're 4 characters, 2 characters in Macedonian, 2 characters in Hebrew, and each of them represent my grandparents. So they're different initials for my grandparents. Because I miss them a lot, and they went through a lot. You can also, if you want to know more about that story about my grandparents, on my channel, I I have a video that's like my history with history, and I talk about how my grandparents, the 4 of them, very luckily, I got to know both on my mom's and dad's side, and I actually knew 2 of my great-grandparents on my dad's side, and they inspired me to love history, so I love them very much, I miss them very much. I wish they were here, especially, and they spoke a lot of languages, as I mentioned last week. And so, yeah, I just kept them as a nice reminder. When I look at my risks, I think of my grandparents, and I said I miss them, and they again they really inspired me to be a historian because they lived through a lot of history. Lost wages, Chad. Not only am I going to come to Buffalo one day, and we're going to go to a Bison's game, and we're going to go to Buffalo Wild Wings, and we're going to go to some buffets. But you and I are going to go to Vegas. We're going to stay in downtown. We're going to wear fedoras, and we're going to lose money on the penny slots, and we're going to lose our shirts gambling on horses. I've seen studies that say music gets partially fixed from a lot of people around the age of 14, but certainly what you listen to during the teenage years has a lifelong influence. Absolutely. Want to go back there? Yeah. So that to me, I don't know if that's purely like genetics. Like that's where there's a kind of like, well, biological determinists will say, yeah, but you were already predisposed for that. But like, were you? You know, like there's got to be something. That would be amazing. You could stay at my house. There you go. We can order pizza. And yes, I will eat a calzone at your house. Don't worry. I concur. Music I loved. Yeah, during my teen. By the way, I still only listen to music that I liked when I was a teenager. I mean, it's not like I don't listen to modern music. I mean, I really kind of don't. I mean, I know who people are, but like I haven't bought. I mean, okay, Blink 182, I think last year put out an album, and like I listened to Blink 182 when I was like 12, 13, 14 years old. You know what I mean? So they're still putting out music. So yeah, I'm gonna buy their records. Sum 41 is another band I started to get to know them when I was probably around 17, 16, 17, because they're from Canada, they're from Toronto. And then they got big. And so, you know, but I still listen to their albums that they put out 20 plus years ago, you know. Um, I can't spell influence today. That's okay. Don't worry. I can't spell anything. Literally, I can't spell the word anything. But so I'm always interested in that. And again, when it comes to things like gender, guys, like gender and sex, I think are two different things. I think that this gender realism is BS. The same with race realism that was popular 10 years ago. Race realism is this idea that we have to be realistic that certain quote unquote races do worse on IQ tests than other races. That like Asians and Indians, quote unquote, South Asians, East Asians do better, and therefore they're just smarter. But like, first of all, an IQ test doesn't mean anything. It's been debunked. And second of all, it's a test. So that just simply means that the people who are not doing as good, which sadly is always almost always Black Americans, African Americans, don't have access. They don't have a social access to the same resources than white Americans or Asian Americans or South Asian Americans. Like it has nothing to do with genetics. And so I fear that this gender realism, it's just another way of discriminating but using pseudoscience, right? So again, race realism is scientific racism, absolutely, Joe. And gender realism, if a trans person says, "I identify with the other body," you say, "Well, excuse me, but extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." By the way, they don't, and there have been statements from the National Academy of Sciences and the National Academy of Health that have actually debunked that because we live in 2024. You know, we don't live in the 90s anymore. We don't live in the early 2000s. We live in a different time where science has actually evolved. So if you have a claim, evidence will do. You don't need extraordinary evidence, right? If you make an extraordinary claim, ordinary evidence is fine. Okay. This is the mantra. And this is just people denying, right? Like denying and LARPing a scientist. Becomes very close minded. And I think very negative, which is not necessarily always a bad thing, but it's also ignoring the advancements that people have been made by science. So, regardless of your belief on politics, right? There's also these human rights issues that I think transcends politics. And so, yeah, race realism, gender realism, come on. And there is evidence. Okay. I'm not a scientist. I don't LARP as a scientist. I don't know what the scientific method is. I'm not gonna go to an investigation pretending that I'm a scientist in order to debunk something. I never learned that in science class. I learned how to actually read scientific studies, okay, that were published by the National Institute for Science and the New England Journal of Medicine and, Cambridge University, Oxford University. And a lot of them are confirming that these gender realists and these race realists are just wrong because sometimes there's also a social element. And brings me back to social determinism, which is that we don't just have the hard sciences, right? Biology, chemistry, physics, all these kinds of things are hard sciences, but we have to acknowledge social science. And I spent a lot of time, even when I was doing a sociology class, which I did as an undergrad, being very arrogant because I bended towards this biological determinism, and then I started learning more, and I started to learn about what social scientists actually do and what quantitative and qualitative research is, and it's actually really, really good. So, and it changes and it evolves and so forth. So we can't just say one side or nothing. And so that brings me to the point where in the debate of nature versus nurture, and this is my belief, I've read some things that may point to this. I could be wrong about this, but I think it's probably that every individual has some mixture of nature and nurture, and each individual will never know because we can't quantify. I can't say, well, I'm 53% nature and 47% nurture. It's impossible. These are unquantifiable things. So even when it comes to social science, there is no quantitative or qualitative number that we can reach at, but there has to be some kind of thing. And so when we look at who are you? Like, okay, I've got my blue eyes, right? I didn't know anybody growing up that had blue eyes. Like nobody in my immediate family had blue eyes, but I inherited that from something. Then I learned actually that my paternal grandfather was not the biological father of my dad. The biological father of my dad was someone else, and my grandfather married my grandmother when she was a single mother and adopted my father. So that's got to be from that probably side of the family, right? Why am I tall? Okay, my dad was tall. I had a great uncle that was 6'8". Okay, that's genetics. But again, why do I like the certain music? Why do I like doing my Jewish culture? What is it about that is part of my Jewish culture? Is it just my genetics? Am I hardwired for that, or is there something more? And so when we look at not just ourselves, but we look at other people, we have to factor in that people are influenced by a myriad of things, which could be biological and could be social. So this determinist ideas are those extremes. And if you know anything, you want to take anything away from what I like to do or what you find here is always when we have two extremes, we have a dichotomy. And if we're chose to pick one or the other, it's called a false dichotomy. And how you get rid of a false dichotomy is asking what is my third option? So if someone says to you, well, is it nature or nurture? Change the or to and, because that's what it is, right? If it's us versus them, why? Why can't it be us and them, right? So that's how I also like to do things. You got your science from Oxford University. They got theirs from the Oxford Capacity Analysis. That is good. That is good, Joe, which has nothing to do with Oxford. Psychology is a social science, and there's social psychology. There's also evolutionary psychology, which says that if you're afraid of snakes, it's because of evolution. Okay, maybe. Maybe it is because of evolution. Also, could just be you just don't like snakes. I'll tell you guys one thing. I don't know why this is. People ask me about my fears all the time. I'm not afraid of snakes. I'm not afraid of spiders. I'm not afraid of heights. What I'm afraid of are large anthropomorphic statues, like statues of large animals and large people. They scare the heebie-jeebies out of me. Talking about Las Vegas, I stayed at the MGM Grand once. Outside of the MGM Grand, outside the entrance, is a massive statue of a lion. I literally had to do this when I was walking in and out of the hotel. Okay, if I ever went to the ancient world and they had a giant statue of like Zeus, I think they had one on Rhodes, or Apollo, they had one on Rhodes. I wouldn't be able to look at it. Also, I think the Egyptians had large statues of their gods. I have a fear that it's going to come to life and attack the town. Like the Statue of Liberty scares the bejesus out of me. Uh, I couldn't look at it when I went to New York City. I've never been to Mount Rushmore, but I would literally have to do this. I'd be terrified. I Is that because of my genetics? Like in evolution, I mean, I'm sure that there were animals that were larger than us, right? Like I'm sure, right? Like I think mastodons and saber-toothed tigers. So I'm sure that's true. But like, and it's been echoing through my genes for 10,000, 20,000 years because one ancestor on the plains was afraid of a saber-toothed tiger. But then I think like that sounds a little complicated. It could just be something about me, right? Like as an individual, does it have to echo through the decades? And again, I don't know. Or it could be both, right? Who knows? So I've just told you my worst fear. So please don't try to scare me. I don't want anyone to scare me with large statues. Don't send me pictures of the Statue of Liberty or the giant lion outside of the MGM Grand at scale. So when you see little tiny people and then there's a big picture of the big, I get too nervous. I don't know why, but could that be because of genetics? I guess it could just be a me thing. I know nobody in my family that's scared of this stuff. So you would think maybe my dad would be afraid of that or my grandparents would be afraid of that, you know? So who knows? But just to conclude, as we're getting to about an hour, is the idea of like gender realism, race realism, that's a philosophy. Okay. Um, if you really want to know what scientists believe, you don't you don't want to look at or talk to people that LARP as scientists. And yes, this is one thing. It's very hard and very dry to read scientific studies. So that's why they get interpreted and misinterpreted by communicators, skeptics, and other people who try to dumb it down for you. But I know how to read scientific studies because I was taught how to do that. And yes, it's dry, but if you're really interested in it, right, like you can do it. I find that there's a lot of elitism in that idea. Like, no, 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 I'm going to interpret science for you, you, the lay people. It's like, come on, empower yourself so you can read those scientific studies and go to, the National Institute for Science or New England School of Medicine. Yeah, it's going to be hard at first, but, read more and more and more, and it becomes better. And if you want an interpretation, go to the study and read what's called the abstract. You don't need a communicator. You don't need someone who's talking down to you. You just read the abstract and also understand that a lot of these scientific studies have to get updated and they're constantly updated. So you might have, like, I might even have some studies that I mentioned today or some things that I believe that may be outdated. I'm open to that. But I can go back if somebody makes, a reference and says, actually, here's another study. Here's some update. I'm going to read the abstract. So again, I'm here to also hope that you as an individual can learn how to communicate for yourself, because sometimes when there's a third party involved, things can get a little miscommunication. So that's, anyway, all my opinions here. And, it's not terribly hard to read an abstract. Anyway, I want to go through the last one here on Irish Mart. I was terrified of snakes as a child. You're from Ireland. Of course, I understand why. St. Patrick's Day, no, was it they chased the snakes out of Ireland? Couldn't even touch a picture of one. Had to use a ruler pen to turn a page. Took years to desensitize myself. Now I enjoy watching videos of them. See? So, who knows? Maybe because there are no snakes in Ireland, maybe because of the whole driving the snakes out of Ireland, there might be some psychological reverb that, like, Irish people are more afraid of snakes than everyone else. I don't know if that's true, or it could just be something with you. I don't think there's a good answer. Like, usually that's how I think of fear. It's like, sure, it could be rippling down through time, or it could just be me. Um, but what I'm saying is, anyone who says, like, "No, it's because of your ancestors," it's like, "Okay, okay," evolutionary psychologists can be like that sometimes, and evolutionary biologists can be like that. They know that it's from your genes. It's like, do they? It could be true again. I know things are passed down, as I mentioned before, but, like, you know, like, yeah. So, anyway, those are my thoughts. Um, on Saturday, again, I'm going to go through the different types of history, different types of academic history. How do you feel about the Sphinx? Joe says, I'm afraid of them too. It would be very difficult for me to go to the Sphinx because they're humanoid, and also, like, in ancient Egypt, they had large jackals and the iris. I think the bird gods, those large statues, they make me uneasy too. Also, I like your new profile pic. Looks really nice, animated. So yeah, it would be hard for me to go to. I would want to go to Egypt and see the Sphinx and the pyramids and so forth, but just giant animal or humans. Yeah, Horus, that's right, Horus, yeah. Those would freak me out. I have a feeling that they're gonna come to life. Like, literally, it's irrational, it's whatever, but that's what a fear is. Fear is not rational. The stone carving of a lion in front of the MGM is not gonna come to life. I know that, but I'm still afraid of it, of course, and you're welcome. It's a very, very nice pick. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to give those thoughts again because we have this thing in our society with, denying people their identities, denying people their expressions. I don't know, we need to have some kind of compassion here. We are learning about sexuality, gender, sex, and gender, that they are different things, and it's okay. We're not denying biology. In fact, there's nothing that denies biology in accepting that gender is a social construct, because there are a lot of medical evidence for this now, which unfortunately, I guess, hasn't rippled through everyone who have philosophical, um, what do you want to say? Uh, what is it? Philosophical. What's that word I'm looking for? Anyway, anyway, I don't know. Sorry about that. They have, I guess, philosophical issues or whatever. Did you know that Andrew Gold was fired from the BBC for racism? I did not know that. I don't know the situation. Not a fan, but at the same time, like, whatever. He doesn't know me. I don't know him. So my comment, I don't know what to say. One of the things I don't like, though, is when people cancel another person and then that person becomes a martyr. They become the martyr for cancel culture. Like, to me, there's certain things that obviously we can't say in our society, but to me, like, someone who is a quote unquote gender realist, they shouldn't be shunned from society. They should have their really horrible ideas put out there, and then have people with better ideas contradict them and show them, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So, like, that's how you handle it. But when you cancel someone, you make them into a martyr for a cause. So anyway, well, again, I'm not going to comment, but that's again, this is all just my opinion, guys. I don't know Andrew, whatever. So those that might have philosophical disagreements or dispositions or whatever with certain things, that's fine. But again, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Canceling people, I don't know, unless of course they are they've said horrible, like the N word. Yeah, you might have to cancel people doing blackface. You might have to cancel people. Things that are not exactly illegal, but they're socially unacceptable. Okay. There's obviously a line there. But anyway, those are my opinions. As I said, completely my opinions. If you think I'm wrong, as I always like to say, please comment. If there's anything that I didn't say, or maybe you thought I misspoke, or you want to put in your opinions, please comment. Please put them. Yeah, please put them in the comments, and we'll have a friendly, open, without any animosity. We'll have a good conversation. So, just to sort of conclude what I was thinking, and again, apologizing because I kind of lost a couple words there, because it is getting a little bit late and I am thirsty. So I should get some water. One moment. So, just to conclude on Saturday, I'm going to go through different aspects of history and academic history because there are different types of historians. History, for example, is not just the history of what's called political history, which is something I like, which is what most of us learn in school, which is like the history of wars, kind of a chronology, the Winston Churchills, the World War IIs. There's always this chronology, Gavrilo Princip shoots the Archduke, and that leads to the ultimatum, which leads to World War One. There's also history of a lot of different peoples and different interpretations. So I'm going to go through those types of history on Saturday with a PowerPoint. And the second one, which I'll decide next week, which will be either on next week this time or again on next Saturday. And we will go through more of the philosophical stuff. We're going to talk about the different types of the philosophy of history, and then we're going to look at historiography from the perspective of Karl Marx and the perspective of Karl Popper, the two Karls. I want to thank everyone who's here. Thank you, Irish. Again, these are informal, so they're just my thoughts. I think about stuff a lot, so now it's good to have an audience. I don't care if it's 4 or 5 people. It's just nice to actually share thoughts with people and to get some pushback. So I appreciate that too. So thank you, Irish, for being here. Please let me know if it was St. Patrick's Day when they drove out the snakes from Ireland. I think it was St. Patrick. Thank you so much, Joe. Again, thank you for all of everyone's support. Jad is here, my friend. Thank you. Joe, Irish, you guys are again my founding patron members. There will be special reserved places and golden thrones for you when tourism becomes a thing in the future. I kind of hope it doesn't, but you never know. And I appreciate it so much. So please check out my stream on history on Saturday, and then I will let you know what's going on next week. Until then, in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.